It's time for your next favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene.
After so many weeks of delving into the dark and dirty side of life, the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene offer you some tips on how to navigate the dark and dirty and painful part of life. That's right, I'm Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Welcome to your next favorite episode. How are you, Jolene?
Good. I think that we're going to sit in the quicksand today.
We are
going to feels like quicksand.
It's quicksand. It's the frustration part, the learning part.
The in-between.
The in-between part.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking about resilience today, folks, and what it is and what it isn't and why it's important.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
So right before this, Jason and I just threw out a couple of different approaches that we're going to reference here. And I showed him this video from Dr. Becky, and she's talking to some high school students around resilience and the idea that you have not knowing and knowing, and that the space in between is your learning space. And that learning space always has frustration linked to it. So when we are frustrated, we know that we are learning and we know that we're getting to the end, and we place a lot of our worth and our value on that end stage, the knowing or the completion of or the project attainment, whatever it is, right? But actually, it's the space in between that's really messy, really uncomfortable, and builds this tolerance for discomfort. We talk about frustration tolerance. We talk about window of tolerance in our nervous system. We talk about tolerance of discomfort. I don't think right now we have much tolerance for anything. We don't need patience anymore. Everything comes with immediate gratification. TV shows, there's no commercials, things Amazon to our door. We've talked a lot about immediate gratification. The longer we sit in that in-between space, the learning space, the frustration space, the problem solving, the journey, the longer we're in the journey, the more resilient we become. Resilience is really what's highlighted in that space. Resilience isn't being at the knowing or the end part. It's all of the in-between that got us there, and the ability to thrive and sustain in there, essentially.
Exactly.
Instead of quit.
Yes. Yeah. Too many people want to quit.
Yeah.
Right away now.
And it makes sense.
For sure.
If you don't have the threshold to withstand the physical discomfort, the mental discomfort, the pressure, whatever that looks like, whatever the issue is, including like the workout, the kid who does 5 extra sprints, right? Versus the one that stops the minute they lose their breath. Like that's the piece, right?
Yeah.
Learning what we're capable of holding and increasing that capacity every time. That's why I actually think that people who can push themselves well to physical limits like that and learn, like when kids learn what their bodies can do and that they can do hard things and work through discomfort, that can be helpful without it being an over function of it and not listening to ourselves. There's a fine line.
There's a very fine line. I know when I was boxing, one of the instructors, Daryl, we did one class where it was basically, we did it at what was it called? I think it was called like a Chinese showdown.
Oh.
So where everyone in the class fought everyone else for like 30 seconds, 2 minutes. You'd fight, you and I'd fight, boom, and then turn to the next person, you'd fight them, and you did that until you fought everybody. And the point of it is you couldn't know what success felt like until you pushed yourself to the point of failure. You didn't fail, but you got to where it's like, you can't do anymore. You know that the end's coming. And I love that because that built resilience right there. Like you get, oh my God, I can't do anything more. Okay, now I know where my breaking point is. And so you can kind of work from that.
I love
awesome.
That reminds me of Pepin, and anyone who lives in Kamloops might know Michelle Pepin. She's a power skating coach. She used to be I think an Olympic speed skater, like really high level. Anyway, she is lovely. She's this tiny, peppy little thing. And she like coached a lot of our hockey kids, and she has been undergoing cancer treatments and supported by the RAH Foundation, one of their spokespeople. She's amazing. And it surprises me none because how she teaches those kids on the ice is, and I remember because Marsh would be like, oh, is it a Pepin day? Like power skating day? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, ah. And everyone loves her. And that's why she would get away with it so much. But I said, so what's the deal? Like, what part do you dread the most? And he's like, because she tells us to find our breaking point and go past it. Right?
That's
and
what it
that,
is, yeah.
like, how beautiful to teach them
Yeah.
that, right? And, you know, it's very different when we're doing that with other people versus with ourselves. It's really hard to do it ourselves. Like, that's why when we work as teams or have a personal trainer in those physical situations, right? That's a big one. You don't truly know what you're capable of, but there's a group mentality that can help propel that. And, like, how much different is it to push through those moments on your own?
Yeah, boot camp
Right?
class is great that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure. So for you, what's the theory of resilience that came to mind for you?
Oh, it's when listening to Mark Manson. He was talking about resilience. It's like two arrows. So the first arrow is the one you get hit with. And you can say, if you could use a physical example, you get shot with an arrow. A lot of people think that that's resilience. It's like, oh, I got hurt. I'm hurt, but I'm going to keep pushing on because I'm hurt. But he's like, it's the second arrow. And it's what you do with that second arrow. What do you learn from the discomfort and the horrible stuff? And how do you approach that going forward? Because that's where you learn to grow. And that learning to grow is the resilience.
Yeah.
Which I love that too.
It's so true, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can have a lot of crazy things and shit things happen in our lives, but you and I both say this. What do you do with them? Like, we survive them, but who does something with them? And that's where the advancement comes. That's, I guess, where the resilience comes in too, right?
Yeah, I have a friend who has had similar life experiences as I have in terms of death and everything like that. And he always, I've been to 35 funerals. I understand death and I know what it means for life, but he's in the exact same spot he's been in for 30 to 40 years. And it's like, dude, I don't think so. And he just can't complete anything.
It's almost like the 35 arrows are still in him.
Yeah. And he hasn't figured out what to do with the
he's
35
walking
paths
around.
away from it. Yeah.
He's got 35 arrows in him, and perhaps somebody else has 35 wound marks.
Exactly. And that's the difference.
Scars.
Yeah. The scars, right? Oh, that's a good one.
Boom. Put that in your back pocket.
Right. Write it down.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. Because, I mean, you can deal with physical discomfort. The last 6 weeks of my landscaping career last summer doing blowouts, I was walking around with a bad knee and my arthritic hands, and I kept working. I wouldn't call it being resilient. I just had a high pain tolerance, you know what I mean? But there's like a price to be paid afterwards. So being resilient isn't being like physically tough and being able to endure lots of pain. It's the process of how you deal with all that afterwards. It's your recovery process and how you help build that into a strength and not to the point where it's breaking your body.
I totally agree with you. And as you're talking, I'm going through my team snap here because one of our moms from the team we had playoffs this last weekend, and her friend from Alberta was in town, and this man was born with no arms and no legs.
Wow.
And
okay.
he's training for a marathon. His name is Chris Koch. Koch is Koch. Koch. So he travels all around. He cruises around on a skateboard right now. Remember, he has no arms and no legs, like more like stub kind of things, right? I was like, how did he get his hat on today? You know?
Oh, yeah,
right?
because you wonder.
So there he was talking to the boys, and he's training for a marathon right now. So he had done something like, I don't know, several hundred or maybe 1,000 steps on the treadmill or on the, stair climber or something that morning. And he told the boys, like, okay, this is one of your hardest teams that you've played all season. You know, I see how hard you guys have been working, I imagine. I'm working hard at something too. If you guys win this team, then I'm going to double my workout tomorrow and show you that I can, right? It was so cool for those kids to hear, you know, how perhaps disadvantaged he might have been born, but what he was able to do with that. And it was really cool to talk to him because he used prosthetics for a period of time in his life, but then just scrapped them when he found this. I think he was down in Florida or something and used a skateboard and was like, this is it. And I can imagine when you look at the neurology of the brain, if he was never born with legs that lifted his torso off the ground, his brain was never neurowired for height. And all of everything would be changed, right? And if you sometimes were 2 feet off the ground and sometimes not, how do you work with that in your wiring system, your whole center of balance, your whole perception, like the way you view things, like everything, your periphery? That's like one day you're walking around in the crowd, you're looking at everyone's butts, and the next day you're looking at their faces. Like that would be really hard to swap between. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he kind of said, fuck it to the prosthetics, right? And I don't know how he's doing the marathon. I never asked him. But it was so so cool to hear his story of resilience that I don't even know if he would call it resilience. I mean, I never talked to him about that detail, but his perception is like, this is the way I've always been. This is what I got, you know?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people who we have, Greg Stewart in town who has one arm, is a Paralympic, you know, I worked with a gal, same thing. And it's so, I think there's a lot of resilience and adaptability that are interchangeable.
I think so too. Yeah. I think part of being resilient is being adaptable.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You need to be, because and that's where people get stuck, because they don't want to adapt. I think, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, this is the way it's always been, and I don't want to change it.
Yeah. Flexibility, rigidity. What is that? Is that a fear of change? Right. So maybe there's a big piece. There's a fear of change. You know, when we think about that spectrum between not knowing something and knowing something and what that learning space is. Yeah. What are the core roots? Maybe some of that shadow work around what impacts the sense of purpose based on how much I know or how good I am, or, you know, I always need to be right. Like, it was interesting, even in a situation that Kevin and I have, he's very much I love you, babe. He's a fix-it man, right? He does so much, and he has answers for almost everything. He really does. He is the most intelligent person I know. And we're working through something, and I am like a slightly different approach of like, we are both still learning how to do this. And he was like, oh, that's so much more accurate, right?
Yeah.
Like, we are both in the learning space here. And that is hard for both of us, because in both of our lives, we have answers for a lot of things, and we do often know what the right thing is. And to be in that learning space as two, I'm going to call us experts. We're both experts in our fields. To be in a learning space, it was like, oh yeah, like there's grace that comes with that. There's compassion that comes with that. There's a reduction in expectations. And I think if you can think about resilience as that, we will approach it so much differently. I know so many people who are reluctant, especially if they're in an expert position, teachers, coaches. I work with a lot of high school students that have had to have repair moments with teachers who refuse to not be the expert, right? And it's been really cool how I've helped them guide some conversations, and it's really created this really neat partnership where they are respected differently by the teacher because of that, right?
Yeah.
And teachers aren't used to that from high school students who are probably a little more ego-based and screw you, right? But that curiosity, I think, needs to be a part of that.
I think the best teachers still have that. They aren't the expert. I know the teachers there's one teacher that did so much damage in growing up, and I'm going to call you out, asshole. Mr. Llewellyn. He was a math teacher.
Oh, we got a name, guys.
We got a name. He would come along if you were writing a test, and I had hardcore test anxiety. So when I was in school, but he'd come along while you're writing the test, and you'd start marking ones wrong. Well, you
can't do that.
You can't do it. But that's what he would do. He'd do stuff like that, and if you challenged him on it, he'd like bluster and lose his mind, blah, blah, blah. But the best teacher in high school, there's two of them.
Mr. Venus.
I had never had them.
He was my math teacher.
There you go. One of them was Mr. Andrews, and he was our English teacher. And he was the one to teach, like all the kids, like you were in grade 8 or 9, if you had Mr. Andrews, you hated it because he really pushed you really hard.
Yeah.
By grade 12, you loved him because he pushed you really hard. But one of the stories he'd always tell early in the class is that he had to do grade 12 twice because he flunked.
Yep.
And you were down on his level suddenly, and
Yeah.
he was amazing.
We had an English teacher like that too, Mr. Paul, and he is lovely, but he was so strict. And you actually had to use page reinforcements on these 2 colored pages at the front of your binder. Everything had to be double proofread. You actually had to have somebody sign it. You had to put these 2 lines at the bottom of every written piece. It had to follow almost what EPA would expect. We had to do that through 8 to 12. And I love that man for it. It was hideous for many people at the time. They hated it, but it allowed me to write essays through my entire post-secondary education flawlessly, effortlessly.
They're teaching you life skills.
Oh
and
my
ways
gosh,
to be
but
organized.
around discipline and accountability
which you need.
and fucking consequences. Because if you did not have that double proofread, double signature, nope, you sacrifice like grades on that.
And see, like when you think of that discipline and that, consequence helps build resilience. If you have consequences and you fuck up, you learn not to do them again, and you get better and stronger at things. If you have discipline, you can push through the hard parts. And the whole frustration that comes from being in the learning space, you have your discipline to carry you forward.
Yeah. What do you think? So riding off of that, what do you think impacts, people potentially not having as much resilience?
Well, that instant gratification that we see in our society now.
Maybe less demand for it.
Yeah, less demand.
Less opportunity to practice it.
Yeah, I think that's good. There aren't enough consequences anymore for things.
Yeah, they pass everybody in school now, I
pretty
hear.
much. I think those are the two big ones for me. And then the discipline. Like, I know, like, and common sense. Like, I always come back to that. And when we were in school, we were taught discipline and common sense. And they're not taught that anymore.
Yeah.
Because we've had that with Griffin. Like, there's a whole component that I get really frustrated with where, like, he just doesn't display it. And I push common sense a lot. But he's still, like, as a parent, like, as a parent, like, my parents would enforce what they could, but they were busy. But you went to school and you got, then that the school system helped reinforce these things that were at home. And that's just not happening now. Like, school doesn't have that. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I don't think life has that either. So I'm gonna use this analogy here because this is what my jam is. I think in our lives, Jason, we got the eggs, the flour, the baking powder, and the sugar, and maybe the cocoa, and the oven, and the bowl, and the mix, and we made cake with it. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, I think kids get the box of cake, and they have to figure out how to put the eggs and oil and water into it.
I like that, yeah.
Okay. And I think that's part of, like, they haven't had the opportunity to learn what happened before some conveniences were put in place. And the same happened for us. Like, we had washing machines, but our grandparents didn't. And I always remind myself when I throw a load of laundry in, I'm like, oh my God, my grandma had like 5 kids and had to do this on one of those fucking washboards we use as a decoration on our wall now.
Yeah.
Down by the creek.
Then she had to hang everything outside. And if it was a day like today where it's cool and wet, your clothes aren't drying right
And when
away.
I make myself, like when I throw on a pot of water for pasta or something, like, she had to light a fire in the stove, which meant she needed wood for that. Like, I can't get my recycling out half the time.
Right?
Oh my God. Right?
Yeah.
And then, all of those things make me go, ooh, that's where I was handed the box and needed to add the eggs and flour. So I think they're just getting things already manufactured and already put together. So they haven't had to learn how to make it from scratch. And I think that we need to find as many opportunities in life to teach them that. So I was talking with a client who has a young adult son who's not displaying some of those initiatives. And I said, now we're not in, like, the preaching stage. It's about opportunity. And it's about building confidence in their ability to do things, because they aren't equipped the way you were. You had a job by then. You were moved out by then because you were abused by your dad and
you left.
You wanted the fuck out.
Yeah.
Well, your kid's not abused by you, and now they have no need to flee for survival, but they also lack confidence in their ability to manage their own survival. Ding, ding, ding. Who's there right now? Who is looking at this with their young adults? That's huge right now.
Yeah.
So how do you resource them without lecturing them? Because that's the biggest thing with that age group, is they don't want to be lectured. We still need to use positive reinforcement. We're not cutting their digits off. We're giving them money, folks, right?
We can't cut their
all
digits
our little
off.
Clifford Olsons out there. So if you listened last week, you'll know what I'm referencing.
Right.
So that's where it's like, hey man, I'm firing up the barbecue. Do you want to be in charge of Smokies tonight? Like, don't put him in charge of the chicken first. Put him in charge of the Smokies for a month, right? Get him confident. Throw a mini speaker out there. Let him feel like king of the grill. Give him an apron. How do you get them participating that way? I think that's how we learn to teach them to cook from scratch.
Yeah, it is. And we've done that with Griffin.
And this is where, like when I said to you, like, hey, does Griff ever want to go on like tour with you or Jess or whatever? Because now you're showing him the business end of things. He gets to see the finished product, or sometimes like when you're away, but to watch you in action is a different thing. And that's why I love the job shadowing that they do in high school and stuff. Go and actually see it in action. The dads who take their kids fishing, the dads who take them hunting. These are not life skills we're able to gain in certain areas of life anymore, right? It's why I cook with my kids now, but there's a lot of things I can't offer them that maybe my mom and Rick can because they have more time, right? Or that like my kids' daycare or that school can. So I love that school is resourcing kids in slightly different ways now. One of the examples of our school is that we're pretty close to an outdoor pool, and in June, my kids have been able to walk there with their class and do swimming lessons.
Which is awesome.
My kids have never done public swimming lessons because I've never been able to register or fit it into my schedule. And I was never allowed to take my twins because it was a 1-to-1 ratio and I was always a 2-to-1 ratio.
Right.
So I could never take them even if I wanted to. So those are all things that I'm under-resourced as a parent, and my children don't have the resource of, even though we're a pretty resourced family, that the school covered for. And I think sometimes resilience is also a lack of resources. I do believe that some people don't have the opportunity in life to have some of those moments. And that's where, as a community, maybe we help to try and support that somehow, right? If I can't do it as a mom, who else can provide my children with that?
Yeah.
You know, and I think in this individualistic society that we have right now, we're losing so much of that.
We are.
So, for example, sorry, I'm blabbering here, Jason.
No, blabber away.
Kevin mentioned to me the other night, like every night something's going on down south, and I don't directly learn about it because I just don't have time. So I'll get like the Coles Notes updates from him. And it sounds like marginalized populations are always being targeted. And I guess most recently, all of the public funding for food programs at schools got cut.
Yeah, I heard something about that too.
And I thought, wow, like what a way to disadvantage a population that could potentially get smarter than you and make wise choices. Let's starve them so that they can't learn and become more powerful. And actually, right?
Well,
What happens?
sure.
What happens
For sure.
when we make people dumber and less resourced? It means that
They're easier to control.
Yeah, there. So let's start that at the youngest level, right?
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I'm not actually that worried about it, because here's one thing I believe about humankind is we will not let the vulnerable suffer. We will suffer in order to take care of them. So I think the teachers are going to start bringing food in for those kids, because they are not going to sit there and teach kids that are starving.
No.
They won't. So the teachers are going to suffer because their budget is now going to be put personally, probably towards that. Small businesses are going to get wind of that, and they're going to start supporting the schools around them. It just means that the government's off the fucking hook. And I actually gain a ton of hope in mankind that we step up and we still take care of those things as communal issues rather than governmental issues. And that's where our fight back can be. And this is where I don't get cynical, because I'm like, you know what? This is where the fight back is. You make people stronger when they come together and they can make change.
Well, I was going to say, and that in my mind is how it should be. They shouldn't be relying on the government to take care of it. People should be relying on each other. There was a time when Kamloops, if you got a box of like Catelli's spaghetti, it was made in Valley View. The lumber that my dad built his first houses with didn't come from China. It came from the mill down the road.
Yeah, Domtar.
And it should be that way.
wherever. Yeah.
I was hoping with the whole pandemic and the shutdown of so many systems, we moved back to that, but we didn't, because it's all about making fucking money. But I think what you see it in the States, and I hope it starts happening here with the tariffs and everything, is we start as Canadians relying on each other instead of other countries. And I think that's something that people like the guy from the South don't understand.
Yeah. That when you create divide like this, you're actually creating union and strength.
And strength, right? That's where my cynical nature steps off the bus for a little bit and looks at that, because I see that as the way things need to be anyways.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's also where resilience comes from.
Oh, absolutely. That's where we look at adversity and potential attack and disempowerment, and we go, okay, what are we going to do with this, right?
Yep.
And I think I like that you referenced COVID there, because I think a lot of us learned to be in that in between not knowing and knowing, and everything changed, and many of us had to learn how to do things differently, which is no different than when we get a physical injury that disables a part of our body from working. And we have to learn how to do new things, which also means new neural pathways in the brain, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I break my leg, I have to learn how to do a whole other route of things, like including your non-dominant hand or dominant hand. Like you're wiping your ass with the other hand now. Like,
exactly.
There's so many things, right, that you're going to have to do differently that are so awkward. So looking at all of those things in terms of like, where did you become resilient and sit in that in between during COVID, right? Where do we feel like we're mimicking a little bit of that right now, you know, in a lot of decisions, like whether people can make certain decisions or not, where people have adjusted their business, like even down to like My one friend owns a hair salon, and I saw he just posted things of like, here's all our Canadian-based company products. And, you know, if you're sponsored by a U.S. agency or you're representing their color product or whatever, like, hey, guess what? I made some changes.
Yep. And that's just what we're going to do.
And through those changes, I now have secured myself more. Even though it might cost more, there is less risk.
Hugely less risk. And
So-
I think you will, if whatever you might lose, you will gain, and the people who like you are going to only support Canadian stuff.
We will always gain in safety.
Yeah,
No
always.
matter what, if we feel safe and secure in the status of our house, our mortgage, that something can't be just taken out from under us, right? This is why people worry about, you know, leased property in certain places or whatever. The more safety and security we have around something, the more really life satisfaction that we have, right?
Big time.
Yeah.
There's a whole Stoic part of the Stoic philosophy is if you have less, you've got more.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you have like just a cheap ass lamp, no one's going to want to steal. You're always going to have that lamp. You know what I mean? It's like you don't need like these grand, fancy, expensive things.
The leg lamp.
The leg lamp, right? No one's taking the leg lamp. You know? But there's a security that comes with that and without a confidence,
Yeah.
right? If you're not wearing like, my $20 shirt from Mark's Work Wearhouse, if I get like grease stains on it, I'm not going to be upset. But if I'm wearing a $200 shirt from like some place on Robson Street, I'm going to be pretty pissed.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know
That
what
brings
that has
out
to
the
do with
Adam.
resilient,
No, that brings out the Adam Sandler in you too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny. I've appreciated. What was it? He was at the Oscars wearing that like
Yeah.
hoodie and shorts.
Hoodie and
right?
shorts, 'cause he's
he's
like,
like,
"Eh."
nobody cared until you pointed it out, right?
That was awesome.
Yeah, I love him. He's just so he's so good.
Yeah.
So looking at some of those pieces, really examine for yourself. And then every day, you know, I think we have so much to learn from our children. Our children are learning resilience, that in between every single day. So the frustration that they experience on a daily basis, because they are never truly in the knowing. They're never truly at that other end of things, right? Like they are always in that learning space.
Then they are for 2 decades.
And now I'm like listening to myself being like, Jolene, this is why they're little jerks right now. They're not, but man, they can be, right?
For sure.
Yeah, remembering that and again, the learning space means frustration. It is always associated with frustration. And it's how well we manage that frustration, including how well as a parent I manage their frustration of that in between. And one thing I'm very open at talking about is like, it's so uncomfortable to see my kids in discomfort. And I know I'm not alone there. So I am having to regulate my nervous system on multiple different, accounts, and don't always do it well. Okay, guys, I am imperfect. Ask my kids. There was a lot of F-bombs this week. By them, not me. I'm just kidding. Both. But, you know, all of those kinds of pieces to remember, right? So this can be anywhere for us, like especially on our healing journeys. We are in a complete in-between, right? And we could be at a stage in our life where we're like, we're supposed to have this. Like I'm 10 years into this, I'm 15 years into that, right? And to go back to being the student, it's crazy. But I also have so much respect for our younger generations that have tools earlier than we do in certain areas of our life. So they definitely lack some tools that we had really early, but they also have some social emotional ones, probably more emotional ones than we had, right? They have a higher emotional intelligence than we did at that age, I think. Because they're getting TikToks around it. They're getting language around it. They're getting conversation around it. We never had conversation. So
it wasn't talked about.
We didn't get the IQ part of it. I think socially we had a higher social IQ because we were required to socialize differently.
Well, it was all one-on-one, face-to-face. You had no choice, right? And if people's being an asshole, they were right in front of you.
Yeah.
Right? And so you learned quicker how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And that's why... And we were more resilient in the workforce.
Yeah.
And the Gen Z's having a horrible time in the workforce for reasons that are not all strictly their fault either.
Yeah, totally. Right? So looking at some of those things in terms of like who in your life is navigating that learning zone period, which includes frustration and is building tolerance, resilience, any of that. I love when we can look at, school years for people, or most recently, I was reflecting on my son's hockey team, and they had a really shitty loss at the end of their playoff series here. And I could not help but just be I was sad for them because it wasn't representative of the season they had. And I was like, man, you guys had a good season. Like, if you could watch a video of you guys in September versus now, the development is profound, you know? And like, I wish they could only see that the way the rest of us see it.
Yeah.
And they're good with it. Like, actually, that's one thing that I think certain sports can really build is resilience. Like, if you look at any sports teams that bounce back and forth, like one time one team will win, the next time the next team will win, like they flush the toilet after most games in terms of like, hey, next time we could win, like, you know, as opposed to like maybe one competition a year. That's, you know, but when you're doing it a couple times a week and you sometimes win and you sometimes lose,
you get good at.
I think that builds that tolerance zone.
It does, and you learn the learning and all that comes with it.
So looking at that, you know, I think that like exactly like that boxing experience that you gave, right? Like, how many ones did you win and how many did you lose? That actually wasn't the point.
30 people.
It was how you it was how you endured that 20 minutes or whatever, right? So, I really encourage people to look at that. And even through our academic career, we're going to have times where, you know, we get certain grades or some things are easier than others. Sometimes we get a teacher that's easier to navigate, or sometimes we get a teacher that really triggers us and forces us into some of those darker places of like, what is so, like, I work with a lot of people around, bosses and instructors triggering things for them.
Yeah.
Which usually is more of a core childhood wound around a parental figure that they either have a positive or negative relationship with, but it can impact their learning huge.
Oh, big time.
And when we do a session to clear that out, it changes their academic performance, right?
Yeah, they don't have that chip on their shoulder
or even
anymore.
their coach, right? How they can perform, you know, in whatever they're doing. Yeah, coach, teacher, instructor, whatever.
Parental authoritative person.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
All right.
So here we go in the in-between, you guys. We're all learning. We are all frustrated at times, and we are resilient as fuck.
That's right. Resilient AF. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, there we go. We've covered off the resilience. Hope you're all feeling more resilient.
Yeah, and maybe next week we'll be in the knowing.
Yeah, right? We don't know, but we can guarantee you that it will be your next favorite episode of the Integrateness Podcast with Jason and Jolene. Until then, I am Jason.
And I'm Jolene. Try and tolerate it.